All right, let's dive into this interwar period. It's that, 1919 to 1939 stretch.
Yeah.
And I got to say, even just skimming these academic texts you gave me, it feels kind of terrifying.
Absolutely.
It's also super fascinating. So are you ready to unpack some history with me?
I am ready. Let's go.
Okay, so picture this. 1918 Paris World War I is over, and Woodrow Wilson is like stepping off the boat from America,
right,
with his 14 points in hand. It's his grand plan for world peace.
Oh yeah, with this huge moment of optimism. People were so desperate for peace after the horrors of the war.
For sure.
And Wilson, he really tapped into that global mood.
Yeah, it's like he showed up at this international potluck with the most hopeful dish.
Surely.
But then comes the Treaty of Versailles.
Right.
And let's be real, it wasn't exactly the kumbaya moment everyone was hoping for.
No, not quite. I mean, the treaty did try to address some of Wilson's points,
yeah,
but ended up blaming Germany for the whole war. And not just blaming them, they were hit with these crippling reparations that just destroyed their economy.
So, not exactly a recipe for stability and peace in Europe.
Not at all. In fact, you could argue it had the opposite effect.
Yeah, because all that resentment festers and becomes this breeding ground for extremism.
Exactly, especially in Germany where people were already suffering.
Right.
And they were looking for someone to blame.
And as if things weren't bad enough already, the Spanish flu pandemic hits around the same time.
Oh yeah, the pandemic just added this whole other layer of instability and fear.
Seriously, millions dead worldwide. It's like throwing gasoline on an already raging fire.
People were dealing with the economic hardship, political turmoil, and now a deadly disease.
Right. It's like, how much can people take?
Yeah, it really led to this loss of faith in traditional institutions.
So in the midst of all this chaos, we get the League of Nations, this brand new international organization.
Right. The League.
Supposed to prevent future wars, which sounds great on paper, right?
Yeah, in theory, it was a great idea.
But then the U.S., the country that championed this whole thing, they decide to sit it out.
Right. The U.S. Senate refused to ratify the treaty, so they didn't join the League.
It's like setting up a neighborhood watch, and then the most influential family is like, nah, we're good.
Exactly. It was a huge blow to the organization's credibility.
Okay, so we're already seeing this tension between idealism, this hope for a better future,
yeah,
and the reality of a world still reeling from the war.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And nowhere is that tension more apparent than in Germany.
Right. With the Weimar Republic, their new democratic government.
Yeah, the Weimar Republic.
They're facing some serious challenges.
Sure.
I mean, hyperinflation is out of control. Their currency is basically worthless.
Right.
And you've got these extremist groups popping up everywhere, like the Freikorps.
Oh, yeah, the Freikorps.
Yeah.
These paramilitary groups made up mostly of disgruntled war veterans.
Yeah, they're basically taking the law into their own hands.
They were a symptom of the deep divisions in German society.
Oh.
They saw the Weimar Republic as weak, unable to protect them.
Right.
So they resorted to violence, political assassinations, which only made things worse.
And then in 1923, you have Hitler staging the beer hall putsch.
Right. His first attempt to seize power.
Luckily, it failed.
Yes, luckily.
Yeah.
But it was a sign of things to come.
For sure. I mean, even at that early stage, you can see how all these crises create this opening for radical movements.
Exactly. It's important to remember that the Nazis didn't just come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
They were able to exploit the very real anxieties and anger of people who were struggling.
But it's not all doom and gloom, right? I mean, Germany is also experiencing this incredible burst of creativity.
That's true. There's this amazing cultural scene emerging alongside the political turmoil.
Right. You have Bauhaus architecture.
Oh, yeah.
With its clean lines and focus on functionality.
It was revolutionary. And then you have expressionist artists like Max Beckmann and Otto Dix.
Oh, yeah. They're depicting the horrors of war in this raw and unflinching way.
Right. It's like all this pressure and emotion is finding an outlet in art.
It's like this pressure cooker finding a release valve.
Yeah, a way to process the trauma and make sense of a world that suddenly feels very different.
Okay, so Germany is a mixed bag, chaos and creativity.
Yeah.
Now let's jump over to France.
Okay.
They suffered immense losses in the war.
Oh, yeah.
Both in terms of lives and just physical destruction.
Right.
But in this period, they managed to rebuild, fortify, and surprisingly experience a cultural golden age.
It's quite a story, isn't it?
It's like watching a phoenix rise from the ashes.
France is incredibly resilient.
Yeah.
They channeled all that trauma into something positive.
Yeah, and Paris becomes this magnet for artists and writers from all over the world.
Especially Americans.
Like Hemingway and Fitzgerald, they're drawn to that bohemian spirit.
Exactly. Paris was the place to be.
And it's not just Americans. Think Josephine Baker.
Oh, Josephine Baker.
An African-American performer who finds fame and freedom in Paris.
Right. She became a global icon.
It's like Paris becomes this melting pot of creativity.
A symbol of hope in a world that's feeling increasingly fractured.
Okay, so France is rebuilding, but they're also like questioning everything.
Yeah, this cultural boom wasn't just about escapism.
Right.
It was also about grappling with the trauma of war, trying to find meaning in a world that had been turned upside down.
So that's where you get surrealism.
Exactly. Surrealism saying, hey, if the world doesn't make sense, why should art?
Right. So you have artists like André Breton and Salvador Dali creating these bizarre, dreamlike images, challenging our perceptions of reality.
They wanted to shake things up.
And then you have Marcel Proust with his epic novel Remembrance of Things Past.
It's a masterpiece.
He uses this stream of consciousness style to explore memory and time.
It's like he's trying to piece together a fragmented world.
Okay, so France, despite the scars of war, is bubbling with creativity and intellectual energy.
They're rebuilding their nation, but also pushing boundaries in art and thought.
It's incredible. Now let's shift gears to Italy.
Okay, Italy.
Because there we see the rise of Benito Mussolini and his fascist party.
Right, Mussolini.
And unlike the chaotic rise of the Nazis, Mussolini's takeover is surprisingly swift and kind of stylish.
It's true. His rise to power was a cautionary tale.
Okay.
After World War I, Italy felt cheated by the Treaty of Versailles. They were facing economic hardship, political instability, and this feeling that their sacrifices weren't recognized.
So enter Mussolini with his black shirts.
The black shirts?
And his promises to restore Italy's greatness.
He was a master of propaganda.
He stages the March on Rome in 1922.
Right.
And within a few years, he dismantles democracy and establishes a fascist dictatorship.
It happened so quickly.
It's chilling how fast it all unfolds.
Propaganda played a huge role in his success. He controlled the media, used grand speeches and rallies.
Right.
To stir up nationalist sentiment.
But then there's the OND.
The Opera Nazionale dopo lavoro.
Right, the OND. It was basically designed to control people's leisure time.
Exactly. It was all about creating this illusion of unity and purpose.
And let's not forget the ORVA.
Oh yeah, the secret police.
They were tasked with silencing any opposition.
It was a classic totalitarian playbook.
It's scary how effective it was.
Control the information, suppress dissent, and create a climate of fear.
But then in 1929, Mussolini signs the Lateran Treaty with the Catholic Church.
Right, the Lateran Treaty.
Recognizing Vatican City as an independent state, it's kind of a head-scratcher.
It might seem strange, but it was a strategic move for Mussolini.
Okay.
By making peace with the church, he gained legitimacy.
Right.
And neutralized a potential source of opposition.
So even dictators have to play the game of politics.
Absolutely. Power is often about compromise and calculation.
So in Italy, you have this complex situation. A dictator consolidating power through propaganda and repression.
Yes.
But also making deals with the church.
Right.
Projecting this image of strength and national revival.
And that image of strength was bolstered by his imperial ambitions.
Right. He wanted to recreate the Roman Empire.
Exactly. So he set his sights on expanding Italy's territory.
So they conquer Libya.
Right.
And then Mussolini is looking to gobble up Ethiopia, Albania, and other parts of Africa.
It was a dangerous combination of nationalism, militarism, and this thirst for conquest.
And it's not just happening in a vacuum, right?
No.
There are other powers on the rise, notably Japan.
Japan is a major player in all of this. They're
kind of a wild card in this whole interwar drama.
They'd gone through this rapid modernization and become a major military force in Asia.
And in 1931, they invade Manchuria,
a
region in northeastern China.
Right.
They basically ignored the League of Nations and international law.
It was a blatant act of aggression.
It's like they're saying, we don't care about your rules.
Exactly. And it showed how fragile the peace really was.
So you have this tangled web of rising powers, crumbling alliances, and all this resentment simmering across the globe.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Not to mention the looming economic crisis of the Great Depression.
Oh yeah, the Great Depression.
Which is about to throw everything into even more chaos.
It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck.
And you just know it's only a matter of time before everything collides.
And collide it did.
Okay, so last time we left off with Japan kind of throwing a wrench in the whole world peace thing by invading Manchuria.
Right.
But While all that's going on the other side of the globe, you have the U.S. living it up in the Roaring '20s.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast, isn't it?
Total opposite, right? You've got jazz, flappers, economic boom. It's like a different planet.
It really highlights the uneven impact of these global events.
For sure. But even in the midst of all that glitz and glamour, America had its own issues brewing.
Oh, absolutely.
Take the film Birth of a Nation, for example.
Right.
Groundbreaking film, technically.
Yeah.
But also incredibly racist. Promoted the Ku Klux Klan.
It's a reminder that progress doesn't always equal social justice.
For sure. And those racial tensions, they boil over in the summer of 1919.
The Red Summer.
Exactly. Because of all the race riots across the country.
It was a brutal and shameful chapter in American history.
White mobs attacking black communities in cities like Chicago, Washington, D.C., and it's not just isolated incidents.
No, it was widespread.
Lynchings and other forms of racial violence continue throughout the 1920s.
It shows that the fight for equality was far from over.
Okay, so before we go back to Europe, you mentioned a figure whose life really captures the complexities of this era.
Marlene Dietrich.
Right, Marlene Dietrich. Why is she so relevant to our deep dive?
Well, she's a German actress and singer who becomes this international star in the 1920s.
Right, I know her. She's like a symbol of the modern woman.
Exactly, pushing boundaries, challenging norms.
But her story is also tied to the political turmoil of the time.
Absolutely. When the Nazis come to power, Dietrich refuses to cooperate with them.
Wow.
She was openly critical of the regime.
So she goes from being this symbol of glamour and liberation
to a symbol of resistance against fascism.
That's powerful.
It's a reminder that individual choices matter, even in the face of overwhelming forces.
Okay, now we can't ignore the Spanish Civil War, right? It erupts in 1936.
Right, the Spanish Civil War.
It's like a preview of World War II.
In many ways, it was. You have the Republicans representing the democratically elected government,
right,
fighting against the nationalists, led by General Francisco Franco.
Who's backed by Nazi Germany and fascist Italy.
Exactly. It became this proxy war, a testing ground for ideologies and weapons.
And volunteers from all over the world joined the fight.
The international brigades.
Right, like the Abraham Lincoln Brigade from the U.S.
It shows how this conflict resonated beyond Spain's borders.
It was a battle for democracy itself.
And the imagery from the war becomes iconic, like Picasso's Guernica.
Oh, yeah, that powerful depiction of the bombing of a Basque town.
It captured the horrors of modern warfare.
And the Spanish Civil War also highlights the failure of the League of Nations.
Right, they were unable to effectively intervene.
Which just emboldened aggressor nations like Germany and Italy.
It was another step towards global conflict.
So while all this is happening in Europe, Japan is still out there in Asia, continuing their expansion.
Right. After Manchuria, they set their sights on China.
And in 1937, they launch a full-scale invasion.
The Second Sino-Japanese War.
Brutal war atrocities on both sides.
Another example of the rising tide of militarism and aggression.
It's clear the world is headed for another major conflict.
The warning signs are everywhere.
But before we get to that, let's take a step back and look at what's happening in the realm of ideas.
Okay, the world of ideas.
Because it's not all war and political upheaval, right?
Not at all. The interwar period was also a time of incredible intellectual ferment.
Like what?
Well, you have the rise of quantum mechanics and science.
Okay.
Which completely changed our understanding of the universe.
So like physicists like Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg.
Exactly. They challenged the Newtonian view of a deterministic universe.
So it's not just about the physical world, it's about how we understand reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in philosophy, you have thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir developing existentialist ideas.
Emphasizing individual freedom and responsibility.
Right, in a world that often feels absurd and meaningless.
Which kind of makes sense given the state of things back then.
It definitely resonated with the anxieties of the time.
So while the world is on the brink of war, there's also this intellectual and creative explosion happening.
It's like humanity is trying to make sense of a world that's rapidly changing.
Searching for meaning amidst the chaos.
Exactly. And that tension between hope and despair, destruction and creation, that's what makes this period so fascinating.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit endures.
And that's a lesson we can all carry with us today.
Welcome back to our final part of this deep dive into the interwar period. It's been a lot, right?
It has.
We went from those shattered hopes for peace after World War I
right.
to the rise of dictatorships, economic turmoil, and another war brewing.
A lot to unpack.
So as we wrap up, what are the big takeaways for you?
Well, I think the biggest one is that peace is fragile. It's not something you just achieve and then it's done.
Right, it takes work.
Constant work, yeah. You have to nurture it, defend it.
We saw how quickly things went south in the interwar period.
Yeah, from idealism to disillusionment to conflict. It happened so fast.
It's like that saying, right? Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Exactly. The interwar period is full of warnings about the dangers of nationalism, extremism,
right,
and the failure to address those underlying economic and social problems.
Which feels relevant today, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we're seeing this resurgence of nationalist movements around the world.
Yeah.
Economic inequality is a huge issue.
Right. It's leading to social unrest, political polarization. It's like we're rhyming with the 1930s.
Yeah, even if the beat is a little different.
And think about technology, too.
Okay.
Back then, it was radio being used for propaganda.
Right.
Now it's social media, which can be good or bad.
It's all about being critical of the information we consume.
Absolutely. Media literacy is so important. We need to be aware of biases, agendas.
Evaluate sources.
Exactly. Don't just take everything at face value.
So the interwar period is like this crash course in the dangers of unchecked power.
Yeah.
The fragility of democracy, the importance of critical thinking.
It's a period that has a lot to teach us, even today.
Especially today. I mean, we're facing climate change, pandemics, the rise of AI.
These are all huge challenges. They require global cooperation, critical thinking.
And learning from the past.
Exactly. We can't afford to be complacent.
Right. We have to actively work towards a better future.
The interwar period shows us that our choices, both individually and collectively, have consequences.
We have the power to shape history.
But it takes vigilance, engagement.
And a commitment to peace, justice.
Yeah, human dignity.
Wow, that's a powerful way to end this deep dive. So thank you for taking us on this journey.
It's been my pleasure. And I hope it encourages people to keep learning about this era.
It's definitely been eye-opening. And for everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the interwar period. We hope you learned something new, gained a new perspective. And until next time, keep those minds curious and stay engaged with the world around you.